Happy 4th of July, everyone. Welcome back to Plotlines. Today we're going to be talking about 5 things to rethink about the American Revolution. Now, we're taught the American Revolution a certain way in high school, and I think there are a lot of things missing from what we're taught, how we're taught it, that sort of thing. Now, what's interesting is I got really excited about history in 5th grade when I learned about the American Revolution. And there's just a lot of things they don't talk about. But this is coming from a place where, I really was drawn to the American Revolution. And I've changed a lot of my opinions about the American Revolution since I got different perspectives on it. So I want to show, or I want to draw attention to 5 things that maybe will make you rethink the American Revolution or see it at least differently. Number 5, the oligarchy takes control. Now, one of the big motivations of the American Revolution was taxes. Now, conservatives like to frame this in the sense of or libertarians like to frame it from the perspective of taxation is theft, and okay, you can believe that. But the point is that they did not have representation in the British Parliament, which democracy is a charade. If you think we have, if you think our input is really taken in at any level, even in the state level, regarding our taxes, I think you're not paying attention. So that's first of all. The whole idea that you need representation to be taxed is utterly ridiculous. Not to say that we should all be taxed high or anything. Oddly enough, the English Parliament or the British Parliament did not tax the American colonies very high. And that's one of the reasons why it became a big deal when they started too. And that was why sort of the oligarchs were able to rally people to attack the British crown when this happened. And of course, these taxes came about because the British government had put a lot of money into defeating the French and defending the American colonists against basically the French and Indians in the French and Indian War. So it's a real misconception that we were being like overtaxed. The main taxes that were being levied upon Americans, American colonists, were from their local governments. And after the American Revolution, Americans were being taxed a greater amount. And the reason sort of this taxation thing became a prominent reason for the oligarchs to get upset, because basically each state was run by major oligarchs that participated in the legislature. These oligarchs were the richest men, and they were the ones who were most affected by the taxes and by sort of sort of small regulations. Like I think it was John Hancock who was basically a tea smuggler, because for a while, in order to help the in order to help the East Indian Company sell tea, they made it so that, or the British Crown made it so that the American colonists couldn't buy tea from anyone else. Now, you can argue whether or not they should have done this, but the point is they were trying to make up some of the money that they lost from supporting the American colonists. And if they had not supported the American colonists, there would be no English colonists in America anymore, because, or at least they would have been probably ruled by the French, or at the very least, manifest destiny, which is kind of not a nonsense, but the idea that we'd be even going over the Appalachian Mountains, further west would have been ridiculous, because if the French had won, they would have either taken some English colonies, or they would have at least stopped the American colonists from going over there. Number 4. Now, this might get people, surprised. Seizing of loyalist property. Now, basically, the American colonists were split into 3 groups: loyalists, rebels, and people who were neutral. Now, there were a sizable amount of neutral, probably the majority, probably the vast majority. These battles were more or less between minorities versus minorities. So I've heard it from some historians, basically, that it's something like 30% or a third of the country, or the third of the colonists. I shouldn't say country. Third of the colonists were rebels. A third of them were royalists, and a third of them were neutral. Now, I've also heard that the neutral group was even larger than that, and I've also heard that heard historians talk about how the loyalists were a larger number. But you're not going to really be able to figure that one out because of the tactics that were used by rebels to keep loyalists down. But part of this was, if you were supporting the king, who at this point, you didn't know who was going to win. You have to think about it from the perspective that it's not a foregone conclusion. But American rebels basically seized loyalist property in vengeance. Now, I'm just wanting you to think about, who does that sound like? Who would do that today in our politics? Because I think those people would actually identify most with the American revolutionaries. Third, in the Declaration of Independence, the colonists complain about this. For abolishing, this is one of the reasons they give to say that the British, or that the king or the British government should no longer have rights over the American colonies, or that the American colonists can now start a new government and be independent. For abolishing the free system of English laws in a neighboring province, establishing therein an arbitrary government, and enlarging its boundaries so as to render it at once an example and fit instrument for introducing the same absolute rule into these colonies. Now, it might be a little odd to sort of figure out what that means. Like, what are they talking about? Well, what this was referencing, the Quebec Act. This Quebec Act was in response to the conquest of what is now Canada, and specifically the Quebec region of Canada. And part of the Treaty of Paris, I believe it was the Treaty of Paris that ended the 7 Years' War and the French and Indian War, involved the handing over of these provinces to the British Crown. And George III had agreed to treat the new citizens, or his new subjects, I should say, as he would treat his own children. Part of this was that he allowed the Quebecois, I'm pronouncing that poorly, but people of Quebec who were French and who were Catholic, to keep their religion, to keep their laws, to basically keep French law. And basically, in the Declaration of Independence, the Thomas Jefferson is claiming that because George III allowed the Quebec to have its own legal code, that it's possible that the king was going to bring about the same type of code, this and deprive the British of, or the American colonists of, English common law, which part of this was freedom to, or basically the ability to practice the Catholic faith. The Catholic faith was banned in, I'm pretty sure, pretty much all of the states. Now, not, it's not like there weren't any Catholics in the in the colonies at the time, but the point was is the penal laws were on the books in all of British possessions, which meant that Catholicism was illegal. So they were protesting the fact that Catholicism could possibly be legalized in this vicinity. So if you're a Catholic, this is not something that you'd want at all. And one of the big things was that the that they were these the group that got King George III to basically allow Quebec to hold on to its religion and its French legal code also was trying to get the king to support Catholic emancipation, which was basically destroyed. Any chance of that by George III was destroyed with the French and Spanish support of the American revolutionaries. So just think about that. Second was the Sons of Liberty. They were basically yesterday's BLM. They used extremely similar tactics to BLM. They were a rebel organization, a group of young men, or and supported by wealthy leadership, such as Samuel Adams, who I think was the cousin, if I'm not mistaken, of John Adams. They would go around harassing loyalists, intimidating them to make them keep silent, which this is one of the reasons why it will be very difficult to really figure out how many loyalists there were. The only loyalist numbers we can get from loyalists is how many who fled the America after fled America after the American Revolution. So they intimidated, they tarred and feathered different members of the royal government. Now, obviously people are going to make excuses because they're going to be like, okay, well, it was legit. They're going to say that it was a legitimate revolution of some kind, or it was, against tyranny or something like that. Which, I were you, I would do some reading of your own and venture to see whether or not it was truly worthy of a revolution, and or against sort of a rebellion against tyranny. I don't think any revolution in the sense of you know changing the system completely, in the sense of going against the eternal logos, which, I mean, the British system had a lot of flaws. It had been basically taken over by the Protestants and then the Enlightenment, but George III was reasserting his royal prerogatives, and the American Revolution basically stopped any chance of any king having any real influence over Britain going forward. So the point is that it also probably doesn't follow Augustine's criteria for a just war. Just war theory probably does not fit this. Anyways, the Sons of Liberty were more or less a gang that went around intimidating people, especially getting making it so that people who share or had dissident opinions, especially in favor of the king, or being a loyalist, this was one of their biggest enemies, were those type of people. So And this also contributed to the decline of royal authority. So I would, just think about sort of the summer of love protests and riots and stuff like that. This is the kind of stuff that was going on. And BLM has a lot more in common with the Sons of Liberty than most people that think of themselves as conservative, or who don't even think of themselves as political. you know you're going to find yourself agreeing probably more with neutral people if you don't think yourself very political. And if you consider yourself at all right wing, or even mid center or something like that, you probably have more in common with the loyalists. Just think about that. And then the final one of the five is the derecognition of God as the origin of authority. This is crucial. In the Bible, it is stated, "Give unto Caesar what is Caesar's, give to God what is God's." Now, this means more or less that God, that the or and also that Jesus is talking to Pontius Pilate, and he more or less says that you would not have the power to do what you're doing if it wasn't granted to you by my Father, or by the Father. And this is more or less saying that the reason people, there are the ruled and the rulers. The rulers, even though many of them do heinous things, their authority, especially when it's just, comes from God and not from the people. And this was one of the big things. This is, in the Constitution, it's "we the people." They are disconnecting God from the government and from rulership. And part of that is that the laws need to conform to God's law in order for them to be just law. If they're not just law, then they are no law at all. That's what Thomas Aquinas said. Now, they Thomas Jefferson uses God as a reference more or less in the Declaration of Independence, but he doesn't say God. He says creator. He's more or less disconnecting uh, the any deity, connecting the idea of deity with the God of the Bible. So, and more or less, and he's putting sort of humans, he's raising humans beyond their means. He's saying that all men are equal, which, are all men equal? Are all men the same? I'm not saying they shouldn't, people should be treated poorly or anything like that, but look at one another. I don't bring this up very much on my podcast, but I don't have hands. Am I the same as someone who does have hands? I think not. And we are all created in the image of God, but we are also, there's also an element of baptism is what raises us up. If we are not baptized, we are not raised up. So those who are baptized have been raised by God a little higher than those who are not baptized. So these concepts are, if you just think about, all these different elements, and then you can easily connect them to different elements that are going on in our society right now. The Quebec Act is very similar to the fact that the FBI is more or less concerned with traditional Catholics, like investigating them, concerned that they are a threat to democracy or whatever nonsense. The oligarchy, you can see pretty clearly how, think about if Mark Zuckerberg, Elon Musk, Bill Gates, and all of them basically had complete control over the government. Now, the first government of the United States didn't even work very well. or at least not to the liking of the oligarchs. They themselves couped their own government and created the Constitution. The first document ruling the United States was not the Constitution, it was the Articles of Confederation, which was a loose organization of states. They centralized authority into the Constitution. The point is that, you know, this is more or less a charade that has been created for us. Now, the seizing of loyalist property. I mean, recently Donald Trump, or they tried to steal Donald Trump's like mansion, more or less. Like, I can't remember exactly what it was. Is that they're trying to make Donald Trump forfeit all of his companies or something like that, for all of his um, including Mar-a-Lago. I mean, they're going after political dissidents, people that they supposedly want to get rid of. Obviously, the Sons of Liberty are BLM. I already made that connection. And the derecognition of God, I mean, they've been removing God from pretty much everything. Public schools are more or less indoctrination into an atheistic, Masonic worldview. That's what we're in. That's what we're dealing with. These are all the effects of the American Revolution. I hope you all enjoy your 4th of July. I don't think these reasons are any, bit of, any of it should, make your celebration of the 4th of July anything less. I mean, patriotism is extremely important. Just because we don't like a lot of the things that our founding fathers did doesn't mean we can't celebrate our country. So I encourage all of you to have a good day, and God bless everyone. Bye.